What kind of 9-2-year-old looks the world in the eye and quietly says, "I'm not done yet," and actually means it? Not a TikTok star, not some viral overnight celebrity, but Michael Caine. A man the industry had already said goodbye to. A man whose spine is crumbling, whose cane is no longer a prop, whose death hoaxes trend online like clockwork. And yet, when everyone thought the curtain had fallen for good, the lion decided to roar one more time. Now, why would a man with 2 Oscars, a knighthood, and more than 160 films come out of retirement for an action movie at 92? That's the question that shook Hollywood, and the answer has nothing to do with fame, money, or ego. To understand it, you have to go all the way back to secrets buried for 50 years, to bombs falling over London, to a mother who hid a heartbreak so deep it rewired her son's soul. Because Michael Caine isn't just coming back for one last job. He's coming back to prove something to himself, and to every single person who's ever been told, "You're finished." By the time the world reached 2023, everyone thought they'd already seen his final act. Michael Caine had just delivered The Great Escaper, a small British film that landed like a thunderclap. Critics called it a masterclass. Reviews poured in, saying it was the perfect goodbye, the flawless final bow of a gentleman who'd given the world more than enough. He sat in his study, surrounded by 2 golden statues, a shelf of awards, and a lifetime of memories. He read those glowing reviews, page after page. They were supposed to make him proud. Instead, they made him strangely uneasy. "What do I have to do to top these?" he joked to his wife, Shakira. But beneath the joke was something darker, a feeling that these reviews didn't crown his story. They tried to close it. 2 days later, he went on radio and said what everyone had been expecting, but nobody wanted to hear. At 90, he said, he could hardly walk. The body was giving out. The roles were getting harder. The time had come. He'd had a wonderful run. He was done. The world nodded respectfully. "He's earned his rest," they said. The industry quietly archived his name. Obituaries were drafted and saved in newsroom computers, just waiting for a date to be filled in. His filmography on IMDb looked complete, frozen, as if the story of Michael Caine had been fully written. But the truth? Retirement didn't feel like peace. To him, it felt like erasure. Behind the polite headlines, his reality was brutal. Spinal stenosis had narrowed the channels in his spine, trapping nerves in bone. Every step felt like electricity shooting down his legs. The fall he'd had years earlier hadn't just broken bone. It shattered the illusion that sheer willpower could bully the body into submission forever. Doctors didn't sugarcoat it. This wasn't a pulled muscle or a minor injury. This was degenerative. It would not get better. It would slowly, steadily get worse. Insurance companies noticed. Studios noticed. Risk departments noticed. Suddenly, the man who once ran, fought, and moved across the screen with effortless cool now came with medical disclaimers and extra forms. Contracts needed health clauses, sets needed special chairs, and eventually, the phone stopped ringing. For a man who had been working since he was 14, who measured his life not in birthdays but in productions, this wasn't rest. It was suffocation. He tried to play the part of retired legend. He wrote, he gardened, he watched his old films and smiled at the young man who never needed to calculate how far the nearest chair was. Some mornings, his hands would almost reach for a script that wasn't there. Other days, he'd find himself rehearsing lines for a movie that didn't exist. There's a particular kind of torture for someone like Michael Caine, being alive and unneeded. Through all of this, Shakira watched. She had known him drunk. She had known him famous. She had known him broken and rebuilt. This was different. This wasn't addiction or scandal or career panic. This was a performer with no stage, a storyteller with no story to enter. A man who had spent his entire existence in motion, suddenly told to sit still. When the pain kept him awake at night, she'd squeeze his hand and whisper, "You're still a lion." She'd put on Sinatra and sway around the living room until he couldn't help but smile. She cooked him the same simple, comforting food his mother used to make from scraps. She tried to make the silence feel less like exile and more like rest. And still, something in him was dimming. Because here's the truth. You can't just switch off a lifetime of survival. And Michael Caine has been surviving since he was a boy under German bombs. Before there were Oscars, there was poverty. He was born Maurice Joseph Micklewhite, the son of a cleaner and a fish market porter. He grew up in the working-class streets of Rotherhithe and South London, under grey skies and real fear. The Blitz wasn't a story to him. It was nights in shelters, listening to buildings collapse and wondering which grown-up wouldn't be there in the morning. In those streets, nobody believed they'd be rich, let alone famous. The ceiling was low. Your fate was simple. Survive, work, pay the rent, hope war didn't take everything. He never thought he'd become a star. He just wanted to be an actor. That's it. Not Olivier, not Gielgud, not Cary Grant, just someone who worked. Someone who showed up and did the job well enough not to get sent home. Older actors warned him again and again. Give it up. You'll never make it. Over 90% of them told him to quit. He didn't. Not because he was cocky, but because he didn't know how to quit. When you've already grown up under bombs, rejection letters don't scare you. Poverty doesn't intimidate you. Embarrassment feels like nothing. You just keep going. That stubbornness would define his career. Later, it would also define his refusal to quietly fade away. But the moment that truly rewired him didn't happen in Hollywood. It happened with a phone call from a newspaper in the early 90s. Did you know about your half-brother, David? The question landed like a bomb. Michael Caine had always believed he understood his childhood. The tiny council flat, the strict but loving mother, the weekly routines. Every week, his mother would put on her best coat, grab her worn handbag, say she was going shopping, and disappear for hours. Nobody questioned it. Not his father, not his brother, not him. The reporter's call shattered that illusion. His mother, Ellen, had given birth to a son long before him, a little boy named David, born with severe epilepsy and profound learning difficulties. In that harsh, unforgiving era, families were told to lock such children away, to forget, to move on. Ellen didn't forget. She had David placed in Caine Hill Hospital when he was 2, and then visited him almost every week for 50 years. Through war, through rationing, through rain and snow and bombing raids. While everyone thought she was out buying groceries, she was taking buses and trains to sit beside a son no one else even knew existed. She carried that secret alone. She never told her husband. She never told her boys. She bore the weight of that grief in silence, so heavy it bent her whole life out of shape. When Michael finally confronted her gently, asking why, she gave him a simple answer. I didn't want you to feel different. I didn't want you to carry what I carry. In that moment, something clicked inside him. All the characters he'd ever played, who hid pain behind a calm face, all the protectors, all the men with quiet grief, all the roles where strength meant staying upright while your heart was breaking, he realized he'd been playing his mother all along. That discovery didn't just break him, it rebuilt him. He understood that love can sometimes look like a lie, that protection can sometimes look like distance, that the strongest people in your life may be carrying a secret you never see. And most importantly, that you keep going not because it's easy, but because someone else has carried a heavier burden in silence for years. If his mother taught him how to endure, Shakira taught him how to live. By the early 70s, success was trying to kill him. He was in everything, the Italian Job, Get Carter, and more. But behind the swagger and sunglasses, the reality was ugly. 2 bottles of vodka a day. That wasn't a weekend. That was the routine. He'd wake up drinking and go to bed the same way. Films were shot through hangovers and fog. Friends stopped calling it heavy drinking and started calling it what it was, slow suicide. And then, one night, something tiny and ridiculous, changed everything. He was alone in his flat, half drunk, letting the TV run in the background. A coffee commercial came on. Maxwell House, nothing special, except the woman. A young woman held a simple cup of coffee with such elegance that it didn't feel like an advert. It felt like a message. The way she smiled, the way she moved, calm, composed, radiant, it cut straight through the haze. He stared at the screen and said out loud, to absolutely no one, "I'm going to marry that woman." Her name was Shakira Baksh, a former Miss Guyana living in London. Tracking her down should have been impossible, but impossible had never stopped a lad from Rotherhithe before. He found her number. He called. She said no. He called again. No. Again. No. 12 times she turned Michael Caine down. On the 13th call she said yes. He jokes now that it took her a couple of hours to fall in love with him, but he knew in the first 8 minutes he'd just found his reason to stop dying. She didn't save him with dramatic ultimatums. She didn't scream or throw bottles away. She did something far more powerful. She saw him. Not the movie star, not the persona. The frightened boy who had grown up under bombs, who'd buried trauma under work and alcohol, who still flinched from old shadows. Slowly, quietly, he chose her over drinking, chose dinners at home over late-night parties, chose waking up clear-headed next to someone he adored over blacking out in strangers' houses. If you ask him today how he survived when so many of his peers didn't, he doesn't start with strength or discipline or even luck. He says one word, Shakira. So when retirement came and the phone stopped ringing, it wasn't just his career that was threatened. It was that sense of purpose that had kept him alive through war, addiction, secrets, and loss. He'd already mourned friends like Sean Connery and Roger Moore, fellow legends who'd gone ahead of him. He'd buried family, said goodbye to colleagues, outlived entire eras of cinema. What he hadn't learned how to do was outlive his own usefulness. The house grew bigger, the days stretched out. There were no call sheets telling him where to be, no early morning alarms, no script pages filled with someone else's words. He'd look in the mirror, not to check his hair or costume, but to remind himself, you still exist. And some nights, even that felt shaky. Then, just when everyone had accepted that The Great Escaper would be his final film, the phone rang. Not from an art house director desperate for one last prestige piece. Not from a British drama offering him a soft, gentle farewell role. The call came from Vin Diesel, an action star, a blockbuster king. A man not exactly associated with delicate character studies. You'd expect someone like that to say, "I'd love you in my movie." But Vin Diesel didn't say, "I want you." He said, "I need you." He had an idea, a sequel to The Last Witch Hunter, a fantasy action film, a genre that had never truly been Michael Caine's playground. The role would be demanding, physically risky, logistically insane. His agents said no. His doctors practically begged him to say no. Even Shakira, who had stood by him through everything, suggested that maybe this wasn't the one he needed to risk his neck for. Logically, they were all right. But this wasn't a decision about logic. Vin Diesel had watched his interviews. He'd seen that glimmer, a man trying to convince the world he was at peace, while part of him was clearly still pacing inside the cage. Diesel had lost Paul Walker. He knew what it was to have someone taken suddenly. He understood that waiting for perfect moments is how people die with their best work still trapped inside them. What he was really offering Michael Caine wasn't a role. He was offering him purpose. And that more than money, more than glory, more than any award is the one thing Michael Caine has never known how to turn down. The preparation is brutal. At his age, you don't just show up on set after a good night's sleep. Every day starts hours earlier, not for makeup, but for medication. Pills to manage pain. Pills to calm inflammation. Pills to convince his spine to cooperate for just long enough. He works with a specialist physiotherapist who normally trains much younger actors. Now she's teaching a knight of the realm how to fake strength, how to shift his weight so the camera doesn't catch the tremor, how to lean without looking like he's leaning, how to time his movements around the brief windows when the pain dulls. "We're not trying to beat age," she tells him. "We're negotiating with it." Insurance companies demand a full medical exam that goes on for hours. On set, they design chairs that look like part of the scenery but are actually carefully engineered thrones of support. Stunt doubles will handle every risky move. A medical team will stand by every single day. The budget for keeping Michael Caine safe is larger than some entire indie films. And still, he's honest about it. He doesn't pretend this is easy. He doesn't pretend he's invincible. In interviews, he talks about the pain, the risk, the sheer absurdity of doing an action movie in his 90s. He laughs when he calls himself an old lion. But there's something deadly serious underneath the joke. He knows this could be his last film. It might even be the job that finally pushes his body over the edge. But for him, there's something worse than that, leaving the stage while he still has something to give. People will argue endlessly about whether this movie is worthy of him. They'll say he should have stayed retired. They'll complain that a fantasy action sequel is beneath a man of his caliber. They'll worry that if the film isn't good, it'll tarnish his legacy. They're missing the point. At this stage of his life, Michael Caine isn't fighting for reputation. That's already written in stone. 2 Oscars, 3 Golden Globes, a BAFTA fellowship, his handprints pressed into concrete outside the Chinese theater, his likeness on stamps, his characters woven into the DNA of modern cinema. He's not short on respect. What he's fighting for is something far more intimate: the right to still feel alive. His upcoming book, beautifully titled "Don't Look Back, You'll Trip Over," sounds like advice to forget the past. But that's not who he is. He has always looked back, at the war, at his mother's sacrifice, at the hidden brother he never knew he had, at the vodka bottles he chose to walk away from, at the girl in the coffee advert who became his wife. He looks back, and then he takes another step forward anyway. Every time a death hoax about him trends online, he doesn't throw a tantrum. He understands it. The world is rehearsing its grief, practicing how to say goodbye to someone who's quietly been part of their evenings and weekends for longer than many of them have been on this planet. But he's not done rehearsing life, not when there's still dialogue to deliver, not when that boy from South London is still inside him, the one who learned that when bombs are falling, the only way to stay alive is to keep moving. Maybe the greatest role Michael Caine has ever played is Michael Caine, the working-class kid who refused to accept he was only meant for factory floors, the soldier who came back from war determined to actually live, the alcoholic who chose love over self-destruction, the son who forgave a mother's impossible secret, the husband who says his entire survival can be summed up in one word: Shakira. And now, the 92-year-old legend who chooses another dangerous, ridiculous, inspiring yes when the world expects a polite "no, thank you." He'll be 93 when this new film finally hits screens. He will move slower. He will speak more softly. You may see him steady himself on Vin Diesel's arm, not as a character choice, but because that's what his body needs now. When you watch that, don't feel sorry for him. Feel challenged. Because what you're watching isn't an old man clutching at past glory. You're watching someone prove that purpose does not come with an expiry date. That passion doesn't care how many candles are on your cake. That dignity isn't about pretending you're still young. It's about refusing to act dead while you're still breathing. So ask yourself this: what script in your own life have you quietly called finished, when you know deep down there's still a chapter left? What dream did you retire because you thought you were too old, too late, too broken, too busy, too tired? If a man with a failing spine, a permanent cane, and a medical file thick enough to stop a door can say yes to one more insane, impossible, wildly unnecessary adventure at 92, what excuse do the rest of us really have? Maybe you're not meant to star in an action film at that age. Maybe you're One More Time is a book, a business, a song, a degree, a conversation, an apology, a risk you've been too scared to take. Whatever it is, remember what Michael Caine is quietly teaching us. The real tragedy in life isn't the final ending. It's giving up while there's still something inside you that wants to try. If this story of a lion in winter lit a fire under you, even a small one, don't let it go out. Hit like if it moved you. Subscribe if you want more stories that remind you it's never too late to rewrite your own script. And in the comments, tell me this. What's the one more time in your life that you've been too scared, too tired, or too logical to say yes to until now?